So let's take a quick look at the PyCharm debugger, and then we're going to come back and take a look at assignment 8 in the context of algorithm development. But the PyCharm debugger is a really interesting, really useful thing because it allows us to see what's going on in our program. Because a lot of times when I run a program, it runs so quickly that I can't really see what's going on. And if I happen to have something wrong with my program, then I'm going to maybe not be able to figure out exactly what's going on, except the error code might tell me one thing in my code. But another way to figure out what's going on, especially if you don't have an error code, maybe your program works, but it doesn't work the way you thought it would, the debugger actually does something interesting for you. And that is, it allows you to put in what are called breakpoints in your code. Now, a lot of you have, I've even noticed you doing this when I've watched you coding. You put these little dots over here by clicking just to the right of the number of the line. And that breakpoint says when you're debugging the program, not when you're running it. When you run it normally, it'll ignore the breakpoints. When you run it in the debugger, it's going to actually pause there and allow you to see a snapshot of that data. So for example, if I have this breakpoint, you notice that it's inside this for loop. And if I run it, it just runs normally. But just to the right of the run button is debug. And it looks like a little green bug. Go figure. Okay, so now when I run this, instead of the regular run menu, what I get is the debugger window. And I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but the main thing I want you to see is that you can see the value of each variable that exists in your program right now. So I can see what str letter is, str new is blank, str text, and I can see all of that as we go. And if I say resume program, then it goes through the next loop and it comes back and it pauses at the breakpoint. I can have as many breakpoints as I want in my program, but the reason this is useful is because a lot of times when you're not getting an error, but your program's not working the way you think it does or you think it should, the reason is that you have a misconception about what the value of some of these variables are. So I can now see, and I'm sorry this is so tiny, you can't really see it, but I encourage you to play around with the debugger later. You can see the value of each variable as it updates. And if I keep running through this program, what you would see is it's building my new string of clean type for export. Because this loop, right, this is saying for each letter in str text, and if it says if that letter is alphabetic or a space, then you add it to this string. The other cool thing that is really interesting about this is that you'll notice it's not actually changing your code, but it's making annotations to the right of your code. So it's saying this variable is equal to this string. Look at str new right now in this program is equal to this, because this is what I'm using to build the new string. The letter that it's on is R in this code. So if I click again, okay, and the reason it's not pausing on any of these characters is because the breakpoint itself is inside this if statement. So that means it's only going to pause if the code ends on this, comes to this line. Make sense? So it's following the code, following the program through. And if I keep going here, you can see as it's building the new string, and finally it gets to the end of the program. And That will help me as I'm doing this. Now, if I have, for example, put the breakpoint here and I debug it, what you'll see is it's pausing on every single character now because it is stopping at the if statement. So where you put the breakpoints in your code makes a big difference also. Breakpoints will only pause your code if the program actually runs to that place. So if you put it inside an if statement, it will only pause there if that if statement is true. Okay, so that is the PyCharm debugger. And there are a lot of buttons here and a lot of stuff going on. But the main thing I want you to know about the debugger when we get started here is that you can put breakpoints in, and that as you debug, it pauses at that breakpoint and lets you peek at the variable values, which is helpful because then you can figure out what's going on in your program. Okay, we'll continue to go a little bit deeper into the debugger as we go through the class, but right now, that's enough to be very, very helpful. Okay, so